I've been asked a number of questions by Brian Kong and his group, so I'll do my best to answer them here. The first question was, what is the Cyrus cylinder? Who made it? What meaning does it hold? The Cyrus cylinder is a document that seems to be contemporary with Cyrus's conquest of Babylon, which we date 539 BCE. It is written in Babylonian cuneiform and must therefore have been composed by Babylonian scribes. But from the content, it's pretty clear that this was done at the behest or the request of Cyrus himself. In the end, I think we have to regard this document as a kind of propaganda. It's Cyrus's claims about who he is and why he has been able to take control of Babylon and what values he means to uphold. Now, I always tell my students that just because something is propaganda doesn't mean that it doesn't have historical value to us, because it does tell us how the person behind the propaganda wanted to be seen, and it also must be couched in terms that he thought would have been acceptable or popular with the audience for the propaganda in his own time and subsequently. And so that is useful information, how he wanted to be seen. It's a strange document. It has two parts. It starts out in the third person and narrates how Cyrus came to be in control of Babylon. And it makes clear that there was no battle, but rather he was largely allowed into the city. And this connects to the fact that the last king of Babylon, Nabunaid, or Nabonidus as he comes down in Greek sources, seems to have been rather a strange bird. He was very devoted to a cult of the moon god and spent much of his time away from the city, off somewhere in the desert, worshiping his deity. And the way the Babylonian religion worked, the king was vital to many of the religious activities, and so the absence of the king apparently was very upsetting to the priests, and there was a class or a caste of professional priests in Babylon, and many activities were not able to be carried out because of the absence of the king. So they may well have been the ones who Cyrus was able somehow to contact and who arranged for him to be basically allowed into the city without a fight. It's interesting that Herodotus, the Greek historian, claims there was a battle at Babylon, and this already makes us somewhat more cautious about the information that he and the Greek sources have. It may not always be correct. It's kind of hard to imagine that Cyrus would have claimed not to have had to fight a battle if everybody that this propaganda was intended for knew that this was a lie, so I'm inclined to largely accept his version. And then it switches mid-document into the first person, and Cyrus tells us in his own voice of his ancestry and of how he came into Babylon and how he dealt with things there, and he makes it very clear that he was very respectful of Babylonian religion and Babylonian culture. He claims that, in fact, it was the god of Babylon, Marduk, who chose him to come and salvage the situation, and therefore he is basically saying that your own God chose me. And we know from other sources that he was crowned ruler of Babylon according to Babylonian convention. So he's basically saying, I'm not an outsider, I'm really one of you. And he does various things to restore proper religion and to help the people who he claims had been sorely oppressed by his predecessor. So all of this is the nature of the propaganda that he is invoking, and it does fit with the general sense that we have from Cyrus and how other peoples thought of him as well. He came down in the traditions of various subject peoples as being not only a great conqueror, which he clearly was. He defeated Lydia and Babylon, as well as other gains in his lifetime. And so he was obviously militarily proficient. And we're talking about how effective he was in terms of his propaganda and the way in which he was able to try to win the support of his Babylonian subjects. And there's also a tradition of Cyrus as being lenient with those he conquered, as sparing the kings who he defeated. And so the sort of unanimity of the sources suggests that there must be something to this. The second question: how can Cyrus's satrap system be considered the first federalism government? And can you describe a bit how his government worked? I have trouble with this question because, in fact, I think we know really almost nothing about how Cyrus and then his son and immediate successor Cambyses, how they sort of set up and operated the Persian rule. We know a great deal more starting with the reign of the third Persian king, Darius, and we know both from inscriptions that Darius himself set up and from the Greek sources that Darius was the one who set up the system of provinces or satrapies with satraps or governors over them, and also the system of tribute by which each region paid money each year to the Persian government. That system that Darius set up, and when I teach this to my students, I often refer to Darius as a second founder. The system that he set up really was the system that then stuck for the remaining 2 centuries of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. And when that empire was conquered by Alexander the Great and then taken over by Alexander's Hellenistic Greek successors, they largely maintained the system that Darius had set up because it was familiar and comfortable to the subject peoples and had been effective for several centuries. And then beyond that, on into the Roman and later periods, I suspect that much of the system was still in place. But none of this, so far as we know, can really be credited to Cyrus. Again, we know really very, very little about Cyrus and how he set things up. Third question: what was the Babylonian captivity? How did Cyrus put an end to this? How did the Jews back then view Cyrus the Great? Is it true that Cyrus is mentioned multiple times in the Bible? The Babylonian captivity refers to the fact that in 586 BCE, the Neo-Babylonian kingdom conquered the Israelites in Judea or Judah, and they carried off into exile the king and the ruling family, members of the elite, other people with skills that were of value to them. So a portion of the Jewish population, basically the upper stratum, was deported to Babylon. And the Persian conquest of Babylon under Cyrus is about a half century after that. So let's say 2 generations later. And it looks as if in that time, most of the Jews who were living in Babylon had grown comfortable and assimilated there, because it does look as if Cyrus allowed them to go back to their homeland, but relatively few took him up on it. There was a kind of a slow trickle. But it is true that Cyrus is mentioned multiple times in the Bible and in very positive terms. And it's really quite parallel to what we see in the Cyrus Cylinder, where Cyrus claims that the god of Babylon, Marduk, looked for a champion to set things right and chose him. And here in the Hebrew Bible, a very similar claim is being made about the God of Israel choosing Cyrus to end the captivity. And then the last question: any last remarks on Cyrus regarding his culturally and religiously tolerant rule. I want to begin with the fact that, or to reiterate that we really know very little about Cyrus, and it does look as if Cyrus became a figure of legend in his own lifetime and very shortly after, because Herodotus, the Greek historian, who is the source of most of the information that we have, is researching and writing just a century after Cyrus's time, and yet he tells us that he knows multiple stories about both the birth and the death of Cyrus, and he chooses the ones that he finds plausible for one reason or another. But what's clear is that in a culture, a society that was largely oral, that is, the vast majority of Persians did not know how to read or write, and information is passed along by speaking and remembered and so forth, that in that kind of culture, Cyrus very quickly became, all kinds of legends became attached to Cyrus, such that a century later, Herodotus cannot even figure out which things are real and which things are not. But there is a general sense, as I've already talked about, that Cyrus was in many ways benevolent, that he was tolerant of the cultures of the people that he conquered. And this makes perfect sense. The Persians of Cyrus's time, or up until Cyrus's conquests, had been people living sort of on the periphery of the ancient centers of civilization, a nation of farmers and shepherds with a sort of landowning warrior ruling class, but they had no experience of empire. They had no set game plan for how they were going to rule the empire, and they had the good sense to take advantage of the technologies and the human resources, the talents available in the ancient centers of civilization that they conquered, such as Susa and Babylon, and in the generation after Cyrus, Egypt. They made use of the skills of the scribes, of the languages of the scribes, and so forth. So all of this argues for a kind of culturally and religiously tolerant approach to subject peoples. Darius himself he connected the empire to Zoroastrian religion, and he used religious ideology to validate his rule and his empire. But there was no effort to impose Zoroastrianism on the subject people, so far as I know. So again, we have just these legends, these various traces of Cyrus as being remembered as being impressive and tolerant and so forth. But I do want to caution you about falling for propaganda, by which I mean both Cyrus's own propaganda, such as we see in the Cyrus Cylinder, and another set of propaganda, because up until 1979 and the revolution in Iran, that got rid of the monarchy and put in its place the Islamic State that is still in power today. Up until that time, Iran was a monarchy, and the Shah of Iran connected himself to Cyrus and the ancient Achaemenid Persian Empire. And in 1971, he spent a ridiculous amount of money putting on a 2,500th birthday party for Cyrus and the beginning of Persian history, if you will. He put on a fabulous pageant at some place in the desert with silk pavilions and dignitaries invited from all over the world. And so much money was spent on this in a country in which there were many poor people that a great deal of resentment built up over this. and probably has a lot to do with the fact that 8 years later, that is in 1979, the Shah was overthrown, the monarchy was ended, and in fact, large numbers of people who had worked with the Shah and were more Western oriented were driven out of Iran. The Shah also made all kinds of claims about Cyrus and supported the publication of books that backed these claims. And the claims included the notion that Cyrus created the notion of human rights. And I'm guessing that your reference to first federalism government is somehow connected to that as well. I think this is all a lot of hooey being done by the Shah for his own propagandistic reasons, and you want to be careful about it. So in the end, you've picked a tough subject. Cyrus exists on the sort of fringes of historical knowledge. If you would pick someone like a Darius, there's a great deal more hard fact that we could say. But Cyrus was the founder of an empire that became the largest empire in human history to that point. He appears to have been a man of many talents, and it may well be that some of what Darius did, that Cyrus laid the groundwork for it. It's just that we have no hard information, no way of really recovering any of this. So I hope that this is helpful to you, and I wish you good luck in your competition and in your future historical research. Take care.